This video is one in a series of videos that cover database topics in 3 themes. We look at Oracle Apex, Application Express for web applications, relational database concepts for designing and building databases, and SQL, the programming language for working with a relational database. If you want to work with the video series, you can go to this URL to get the scripts and handouts. In the previous videos in this APEX series, we've done several things to clean up data in the database and add lookup tables using the Create Lookup feature in Object Browser and APEX. But we do have a little more to do, and it's best to get this cleanup done before we start creating more forms and reports. So we're going to look at the data model, import the data dictionary in SQL Developer, and look at the columns in each table and decide whether we need a static or a dynamic LOV for some of those columns. There's a distinct advantage in using the dynamic LOVs because at the database level, in the database itself, you're going to get the software, the DBMS, Database Management Software, enforcing data integrity rules. In other words, if you have a dynamic LOV based on a lookup table, then you will never be able to input an invalid data item in the foreign key field that uses that LOV. So let's take a look at the data model. I'll switch over to SQL Developer. So I have already imported the data dictionary, but just as a reminder, we've done this in previous videos. I'll go to File, Data Modeler, Import, Data Dictionary, and step through the screens to pick the account to log in with and select the tables that I want to see in the model. Right now we have 2 lookup tables. By the end of this session, we will have several more. So from here on, I probably won't include the lookups because they will add a lot of clutter to the basic data model, but they serve a vital purpose in providing lists of values and limiting your choices so that you only select from these lists of values. So to have something to write on, I did a File, Data Modeler, Print Diagram, and printed a PDF file so that I could literally print that out and write on the diagram. So I have a PDF file that shows the data model, and I printed that out. I'm going to switch to the document camera so I can write on this diagram. So I've already highlighted the columns in the tables where I think we're going to want an LOV, a list of values. We've already dealt with animals. We created several static LOVs. That's what the S is standing for here. We created a couple of lookup tables. That's what the D stands for here. So we've done all of these LOVs and created a lookup table if we needed it. In activities, we need a lookup table for category, and we'll do that in Apex, and for subcategory, and then we're going to modify this one. Just because we have a dynamic LOV, however, does not mean that we need to have a table, a new table, because we actually already have the tables and the data that will generate this dynamic LOV. Client and persons come from persons. So we don't need to do anything else there other than create the LOV. We don't need an additional table. The same thing for animal ID. The same thing for zip. We have that table. So no new table, no lookup table needed because we already have it. We're going to create 2 static LOVs, one for status, one for role, in the employees table. And again, the supervisor ID is a dynamic LOV that's going to come from data in the existing tables. So we don't need to create that. So that's no new table. I'm logged in as Mina Mendez, one of my developer accounts, and I'm going to go to SQL Workshop Object Browser. Then I will select from the tables. I'm going to be working with activities, and I want a new lookup based on category. So I'll do a create lookup table, and I need to select my category as the column to do the lookup on, and I'll go with the default names for the new table and the new sequence and create that lookup. I'll go back to activities, and I will do a lookup based on subcategory. Take the defaults and create that. Now the one thing I want to do here is I will eventually use an LOV in a form where you select the category and have that filter automatically the subcategory. But to make that connection, I need to add a field here to subcategory for the, for the category lookup, which is number data type. So I will come in here to this table, which is the subcategory lookup, and I will add a column. It'll be category underscore ID, number data type. And I'll go ahead and click next and finish. Because there's very little data in the lookup table, right now I'm going to do manual data entry for this to link the category with the subcategory. Bath and teeth are under grooming. So if we look at category lookup, what are our choices? We look at our data, we have medical and grooming. So grooming is 2, medical is 1. So I'll come back to the subcategory and I will edit. Let's first do bath. I'll look at bath and I will add the category of 2 and apply the change. And then I'll do the teeth and apply the 2 by type in the 2 and apply that change. Everything else is going to be 1. Notice we've already got some data quality issues because we have vaccination and then vaccinations, plural. I'm going to simply delete one of those. Do an edit and then delete. Don't worry, but I can't do that. And this is referential integrity. What this means is there's already associated data in the animals table, which makes sense because this is where we got the data from. I have to clean it up at the animal record level before I can delete this. So I'm going to look for vaccinations plural, and I need to query on category or subcategory 3. So I'll look for 3 and have it display all the fields and run that query. So I have 2 records that are using 3. I will edit each one of those and change it to a 2 and then apply the change. If you're working, by the way, if you're working with existing data, you're not building a database from scratch, it's almost always necessary to do some data cleanup if you haven't been maintaining data in a valid relational database. Okay, so let me come back to subcategory. Now let's see if I can get rid of 3. And I'll hit delete. And I was able to do that. It does not matter that you don't have consecutive numbers here. The ID is simply a unique identifier. Don't associate it as some kind of counter, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is not its purpose. So it's fine that we no longer have a 3 here. I now need, and I'll pause the video, I'll edit these so that the rest of these are 1. So I've made those modifications. Now it's time to move over to the shared components of our application and start creating the LOVs. So I'll go to Application Builder, Go into the daily operations, which is kind of our developer working application. Go into shared components and list of values. Now I need to create several LOVs, and I've made a little to-do list here in Notepad. We've already done this, created the lookup tables. I want to create a dynamic LOV for both of these. So I'm going to create from scratch, and I'll call it activity category, and it will be dynamic. And instead of typing in the code, I'll show you how to use the GUI interface to create one of these. I'm going to select category, click next. I want to display the text and return the ID, and I'll click next, and we see that Apex has generated the code for us. Select category. This is the first thing that's listed is the display, what we're going to see in the drop-down list, but we'll store the corresponding category ID. So I'll click finish and create that list of values. I'll do the same thing do another create from scratch. This will be activities subcategory. That'll be dynamic. I'll use the GUI interface to get my list, to get the code generated. So I'm going to pick the subcategory lookup. I'll click next, and I will pick the subcategory and return the subcategory ID. We'll end up modifying this a little bit, but for now this will get us started. And finish and create that list of values. Coming back to Notepad, so we've done that part. Now we need two static LOVs, one for employee status that simply shows and stores active and inactive. So I want to create from scratch. This will be a static LOV, and this will be employee status, and it'll be active, and it'll store active. It'll be inactive and inactive, and create that list. I'll create a list for employee roles. We treat volunteers and veterinarians as employees. They're just not paid. So we have volunteer, employee, veterinarian, and vol imp vet. So I paused the video while I started this static list. This is the display column. This is the return value stored in the foreign key field. So I'll create that list. Coming back to Notepad. So we've done that. The LOVs to create next are dynamic LOVs. These are the ones we're going to create. A list of clients, a list of employees, a zip code list, and an animal list. There's a corresponding SQL video that will look at one or two of these and go over them in detail. But for now, here we have the code. I'll just briefly describe what they're going to provide. All of these use what we call concatenated fields, where we're taking more than one column and combining them together into a single display column. So instead of just saying, here's the column, display it, and here's the column with the return value, we're going to take two or more columns, put them together, and have them treated as a single column in the display. So for example, this is the client ID or the client list. I'll do a create from scratch. This will be the client list. It's dynamic. And I'll replace what we have as example code with what I've written. I don't think you actually need the semicolon. So let's create this list. And I would also come to SQL Workshop and open up SQL commands in a separate tab. And let's take a look at what we get so we can actually see that list without putting it into a form. So if I run this code, then you see that I'm getting last name, then a comma, then the first name, then a colon, and then I'm getting the pers ID, the unique identifier. So, whoops, actually pop myself out. Get back into shared components, list of values. So I'll come back to Notepad, and the next list I'm creating is the employee list. So I do a create from scratch. That'll be the emp list, dynamic, replace the code, and this will be one of them I have talked about in the SQL video, because this uses two tables specifically to eliminate persons, records and persons that aren't associated with an employee. So I'm going to try this with the semicolon, and it works fine. So we don't have to remove the semicolon. The next is the zip list. So I'll copy that code in. Zip list, dynamic, copy in the code, create the list. Finally, we have the animal list from scratch, animal list, dynamic, and create that code. So I have an error in this code, and the error is because I'm missing a comma here. So I didn't separate my two columns, the display and the return. If I come over to SQL commands in a separate tab, copy that in, make my correction with the missing comma, and run that, then again we see the name of the animal, the dominant breed, and the animal ID. So we'll use these lists of values in many of the forms that we're about to create. If there's not a character limit on the description that goes along with this video in YouTube, I will include the coding for these dynamic LOVs in that description. So you can use copy paste if you don't want to try to replicate what I'm showing you in the video by typing it. Take a look at the SQL video if you want a better understanding of how these queries for the dynamic LOVs work. Remember the naming conventions for related videos in this tutorial series. The APEX videos are 00 through 12, 14, whatever, however many videos there are. If there's a related database video for a specific video, let's say I've at APEX02, then that name is going to be, for the database, is going to be APEX02 DB, and then the number of that video series, because for this one APEX video I might end up having 2 or even 3 videos about the database concepts. There'll be some APEX videos that have none of these, but this is how you can access the database videos specific to that APEX video. And the same thing would go if I have APEX, let's say 03. I have something specific I want to cover in SQL. That would be SQL and 01 through SQL 03. So I would have 1, 2, 3. All of these relating to the APEX video 03. Hopefully that'll help.